Who died first? Exploring the mystery of Adam and Eve. Have you ever wondered who died first, Adam or Eve? The answer might surprise you. The Bible gives us clues, ancient texts hint at possibilities, and archaeology adds new layers to this mystery. While Adam's lifespan is recorded in Genesis, Eve's fate remains strangely silent. Was this an intentional omission? Could Eve's death have deeper theological meaning? Stay with me as we uncover historical evidence, ancient traditions, and biblical insights that could finally solve this age-old question. Join me as we take a deep dive into one of the Bible's greatest unsolved mysteries. Who died first, Adam or Eve? If you love biblical mysteries, theology, and historical analysis, this video is for you. We will explore 12 key points to build our case. Now, let's begin. 1. Biblical evidence. The Bible explicitly states Adam's lifespan. So all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Genesis 5:5. However, Eve's death is never recorded. This silence is intriguing, especially since Eve played such a vital role in human history. If she had outlived Adam, wouldn't the Bible mention her final years? The lack of information suggests that Eve died first. Biblical genealogy typically records significant figures, yet Eve disappears from the narrative after giving birth to Seth. The absence of her death in Scripture raises an important question. Was her passing considered too early or insignificant compared to Adam's? This omission alone is a strong indication that Eve died before Adam. 2. Patriarchal focus in ancient writings. In the ancient world, genealogies primarily documented male lifespans, which is why Adam's years are counted while Eve's are not. This tradition was common in biblical times, reflecting a cultural focus on patriarchal lineage. If Eve had lived longer than Adam, it would have been an extraordinary event worth recording, yet no such mention exists. Ancient Mesopotamian and Sumerian records, which share parallels with Genesis, also emphasize male lifespans while largely ignoring female ones. Some scholars suggest that this silence means women were often assumed to pass away earlier due to natural causes such as childbirth complications. The absence of Eve in Adam's final years suggests she was no longer alive to witness his 930th birthday. If she had survived, we would expect at least a passing reference to her role in Seth's lineage or Adam's old age, but none exists. 3. Theological implication of the curse, Genesis 3:16-19. The curse pronounced in Genesis 3 gives us another important clue. Eve was told she would experience great pain in childbirth, which could imply an early death from pregnancy-related complications. In contrast, Adam's curse involved laboring for food from the ground, something he continued doing for centuries. Childbirth was a significant risk in ancient times, and even today, maternal mortality remains a major issue in some parts of the world. Given that Eve bore multiple children, including Cain, Abel, and Seth, she would have faced repeated exposure to these dangers. The curse did not state Adam would die young from his toils, but it did indicate that Eve's suffering would be intense, possibly foreshadowing a shorter lifespan. If Adam survived centuries of hard labor, but Eve endured the painful effects of childbirth, wouldn't it make sense that she passed away first? Before we continue, if you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more thought-provoking biblical content to you. Now, let's keep going. 4. Archaeological and historical context. Looking beyond the Bible, historical records suggest that women in ancient societies had significantly shorter lifespans than men. In Mesopotamian and Akkadian cultures, civilizations that parallel early biblical history, women often died young due to childbirth complications, malnutrition, and societal conditions. Men, on the other hand, were more likely to survive into old age if they avoided war or injury. If we apply these historical patterns to Adam and Eve, it becomes even more plausible that Eve perished first. The Bible does not mention any additional supernatural longevity for Eve beyond what Adam received. Thus, if she followed normal human mortality trends, her lifespan would likely have been shorter than Adam's 930 years. Historical patterns reinforce what Scripture subtly suggests: Eve died before Adam. 5. Jewish and Christian traditions. Ancient Jewish and Christian writings provide even more clues. While the Bible does not explicitly state Eve's death, rabbinic traditions and Christian commentaries assume that she died before Adam. Some Jewish midrashim even suggest that Adam buried Eve himself, mourning her loss long before his own passing. The Book of Jubilees, an ancient Jewish text, implies that Eve was buried separately from Adam, further supporting the idea that she predeceased him. If later traditions consistently place Eve's death before Adam's, could this be an echo of an ancient understanding now lost to time? These traditions, while not part of the biblical canon, reflect early theological beliefs that reinforce our theory. What if Eve's early death wasn't just a historical event, but a deeper symbol of humanity's mortality? Could her passing represent the first true consequence of sin in the world? Keep watching as we explore even more compelling evidence. 6. The nature of Adam's final years. Genesis 5:3. 5 tells us that Adam lived for 930 years and had many sons and daughters. But if Eve had still been alive, wouldn't she have been mentioned alongside Adam's long life? Other biblical figures, such as Sarah and Rebekah, are acknowledged in their old age. The omission of Eve in Adam's final years strongly suggests she had already passed away. If Eve had outlived Adam, her role as the matriarch of early humanity would have been significant enough to warrant mention. The lack of any reference to her presence during Adam's later life is yet another silent confirmation that she died first. 7. Absence of Eve in Seth's lineage. Seth's birth is recorded in Genesis 5:3, but Eve's presence is completely absent in his later years. If she had lived long enough to see his lineage develop, wouldn't the Bible acknowledge her role? Instead, it is Adam who remains a central figure while Eve fades into the background. This pattern aligns with the idea that she did not live as long as Adam. The genealogy focuses on Adam's continued life and his descendants, implying that Eve was no longer alive to contribute to their story. The absence of any maternal role for Eve in later generations is further evidence that she predeceased Adam. 8. Early mortality trends and childbirth risks. Women in ancient times faced significantly higher mortality rates than men due to childbirth risks. Given that Eve bore multiple children, her likelihood of succumbing to pregnancy complications was high. Historical data from early civilizations such as Egypt and Mesopotamia show that maternal mortality was a leading cause of death for women. If Eve followed the same pattern as women throughout history, her death would have come much earlier than Adam's. The Bible's silence on her fate might simply reflect the reality that her death was an expected outcome of life in the ancient world. 9. Theological symbolism of Eve's death. Eve's life is deeply intertwined with the origin of human mortality, as seen in Genesis 3:19. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Many theological interpretations suggest that Eve's early death may have been a direct consequence of the curse placed upon humanity. Unlike Adam, who endured hard labor but lived for centuries, Eve's curse was tied to childbirth, a leading cause of death for ancient women. This contrast in punishments could imply that Eve succumbed to the curse sooner than Adam. Additionally, some scholars argue that since Eve was the first to sin, she might have been the first to experience the full weight of mortality. In ancient Jewish and Christian traditions, Eve's death is sometimes depicted as a tragic but necessary fulfillment of divine justice. This symbolic interpretation reinforces the idea that Eve's early passing served as a reminder of the cost of disobedience. If Eve had outlived Adam, her presence might have been noted in later biblical texts, yet she is entirely absent. 10. Early Christian and Rabbinic traditions. Various Jewish and early Christian traditions suggest that Eve predeceased Adam, even though the Bible does not directly state it. The Book of Jubilees, an ancient Jewish text written between the 2nd century BCE and 1st century CE, implies that Eve died and was buried separately from Adam. Rabbinic midrashim, which offer interpretations of biblical stories, also hint at Eve's early demise, with some accounts stating that Adam buried her with sorrow. Additionally, some early Christian commentaries propose that Adam mourned Eve deeply and later instructed his children on how to bury him beside her when his time came. These traditions, though non-canonical, reflect the widespread belief among early religious communities that Eve likely died first. Moreover, such traditions emphasize Eve's significance in theological discussions while explaining her absence from Adam's final years. If Eve had outlived Adam, it is probable that some tradition or record would mention her continued role in guiding their descendants, yet no such evidence exists. 11. Adam as the first recorded burial. Several traditions suggest that Adam was the first human to receive a recorded burial, implying that others, including Eve, had already passed away. In some Jewish sources, Adam's burial site is linked to the cave of Machpelah, the same place where Abraham and Sarah were later buried. If Eve had died after Adam, her burial might have been mentioned alongside his, but there is no such record. This aligns with the patriarchal focus of biblical genealogies, which typically emphasize male figures while omitting details about their wives unless their deaths had theological significance. Furthermore, burial customs in early civilizations often involve marking the graves of key figures, and yet no mention of Eve's grave is found in ancient biblical or extra-biblical sources. Some traditions even suggest that Adam's children honored his burial with great significance, while Eve's remains were not similarly venerated. This silence further supports the argument that Eve passed away earlier and was buried before formal burial practices were well established. 12. Silence in post-Genesis accounts. Eve's absence from post-Genesis biblical narratives is striking, especially given how frequently Adam is mentioned in later scriptures. Adam appears in books such as Job, 1 Chronicles, Luke, and Romans, yet Eve is conspicuously absent. In Job 31:33, Adam is referenced in relation to human sin, but there is no mention of Eve, despite her direct involvement in the fall. Similarly, Romans 5:12-14 discusses how sin entered the world through Adam, emphasizing his role while remaining silent about Eve's fate. If Eve had outlived Adam or played a significant role in the lives of their descendants, one would expect at least a brief reference to her in these later texts. Some scholars argue that this omission is due to the patriarchal nature of biblical writings, but even important women like Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel receive mentions regarding their deaths and burials. The complete silence surrounding Eve suggests she was no longer alive by the time Adam's story neared its end. This lack of further references reinforces the conclusion that Eve likely died before Adam, and that her death was not deemed necessary to record in biblical history. This concludes the compelling investigation into who died first, Adam or Eve. Based on biblical evidence, historical context, theological interpretations, and ancient traditions, it appears overwhelmingly likely that Eve passed away before Adam. If you enjoyed this deep dive into biblical mysteries, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more engaging content on faith, history, and spirituality. Do you agree with our conclusions, or do you have a different interpretation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you.